You know, cities have personalities, and Chicago's personality fits Shameless perfectly.
The neighborhood is a character in itself. It's the driving force behind most of the motivations of these characters.
It sets the backdrop against which the characters struggle with life.
What are the kinds of stores you would find here? What are the kinds of jobs people would have here? What is the reality of the way they live? It's a place where they live as a family unit, where they get along with the neighbors.
Shut the fuck up!
They play on the street, just like in any neighborhood in America.
The Gallaghers aren't unusual in the neighborhood. They're at the level of the neighbors, and they're all fighting together to keep their head above water.
The neighborhood has changed over the course of these 3 seasons into a version of home from the eyes of survival.
What, are you picking up a little crack first?
This is where I live.
At first glance, you see extremely poor, very tight living quarters, some incredibly degenerate interior living spaces that you would never even want to step foot into. But now I sort of see it almost from a Gallagher perspective, where everyone is just human there, and they're all trying to survive, and they have very little to survive with, but they make it work.
The Gallagher's neighborhood is on the south side of Chicago. It's a bit rough around the edges.
Low-income families, people are doing whatever it takes to survive and, you know, stay off the streets. The Gallaghers are a perfect example of that.
Very, like, close-knit community, but not in the typical sense. You know, people fight for certain things together, and everyone kind of knows each other and looks out for each other in an interesting way.
I think that those neighborhoods are kind of weirdly tolerant, and I think the show plays upon that.
Fuck you, Gallagher.
There is a hierarchy, too, and that's something that we've created where, as low income as the Gallaghers are, they still have more than the Milkoviches. So there's even a class structure within the lower class environment.
We try to anchor the stories as much as possible in this neighborhood, in the environment these characters live in, and the kind of lifestyle they have.
It's a neighborhood that doesn't necessarily have the best schools. It's a neighborhood that if a crime has occurred, and crime occurs all the time, that the police don't necessarily rush to get to. And so you have characters who have to come up with their own solutions on how to fix things.
There's a level of desperation that all the characters in the show have and are stuck in their situations. And so I think the environment is everything in many ways.
One of the things that's happening in the 3rd season is we actually are seeing the family in places that are not like the Gallagher neighborhood, and it makes them stand out independently. Even when you see our characters in worlds that are not normally their world, you see that the right place for them to be is the place that we've established them in the hood.
I run into fans of the show all the time who assume we filmed the whole show in Chicago, which is very nice because we have a great production designer, Nina Ruscio, who's able to make sure that everything looks like Chicago. She does such a great job of giving an indication of where these people live and what their lives are like without as the writers, having to go into detail and tell the audience those things.
You know, we start with on Shameless this idea that if you have a good idea, write it, and then we'll pare it back if we can't afford it, because we're a real run-and-gun show. We're trying to jam a lot of story into 60 minutes, and sometimes you just can't do all of that. Never has she come back to us and said, wow, you know, this can't be done, it just can't make it work.
When I watch the show, I mean, I think the standing sets are really great. And in a strange way, I never feel more in Chicago than when the show is on those sets. I mean, I just think that they're incredibly well done.
The Gallagher house is sort of an outward expression of the interior chaos of their actual lives. So the mess of the home, the kind of hoarding, the fact that there's things that have been there in the same place, piled in stacks for 3 seasons now, actually lends to the flavor of the home.
In the kitchen, for example, you'll notice that they have large boxes of everything because you could tell that they're on a budget and they're buying in bulk to feed the family.
Big holes in the walls that have happened from assorted story plots where someone has started to do repairs on a wall but then never finished. Part of that unfinished business that's all around them in the Gallagher house is part of the layering that makes that place feel real.
When we were scouting on the pilot of the show, we went to all of these houses in Chicago, in this neighborhood, and saw what the insides of their homes look like. And what was interesting, that every home had a big screen television like the Gallaghers have.
You'll see these houses with plastic on the windows and no glass and very little insulation, but you will see a satellite dish. So it's part of the culture. That TV in the Gallagher house, Frank stole, I'm sure, at some point along the line. Sheila Jackson's home has evolved over the last 3 seasons. I mean, when we first met Sheila, she was an agoraphobe and she couldn't stand being outside. And so the preciousness of her home was complete. It was hermetically sealed.
And I think every little piece in the house tells a story about her, because in the first season, you remember, Eddie loved the clowns, so the clowns were all over the place.
Every once in a while, you'll see one little clown. I'll notice a little clown left over from Eddie, because that is part of her life, too. And the plastic covers are still there, because that's part of her life, too. But now there's a mountain of baby diapers, or now there's a pile of sexual toys.
Sheila's house actually backs up on the L, and I always, try to keep that in the performance when we're shooting, here, just to remember that, every minute or so there's a train blasting by and we can't really hear anything.
What's been revelatory about the evolution of her home over the last 3 seasons, you've seen the life of a baby come into the house, and so the mess of that, you've seen her let loose. Her sexual freedoms have been more exposed in the decor that is in and about the house. The Alibi Room is an icon of the neighborhood bar. And it's a place that people feel more comfortable in than in their own homes. And it should feel like that. And it shouldn't feel precious. It shouldn't feel overly designed. And I love that about the Alibi Bar, that it really does feel like a place you can just saddle up to and order yourself a drink, even if it's 10 o'clock in the morning.
The Alibi looks like an old school gritty bar that you would see in the Midwest. When I walk into the Alibi and go behind that bar, I don't have to do much. I just throw a rag over my shoulder and I'm a bartender from the Midwest.
There are certain things that are unique to the Midwest, just little tiny things that we introduce into the show in a way to make sure that we stay honest with what happens in Chicago, like Italian beef or old-style beer. These are things that are unique to Chicago, and so we want them to be unique to Shameless.
I'm gonna slip out the back.
Sounds like you were slipping it out the back in Mexico, Frank.
We use the Warner Brothers lot frequently for locations that are to be Chicago. I pride myself and my art department on transforming them.
We tend to shoot on the back lot by kind of limiting our shots and concentrating more on the texture of what we are seeing than really on the structure of what we're seeing.
She'll go around the back and see where the rusty nails are and the rusty fence and the overgrown grass. And we'll limit our shots in there and we'll shoot it tighter, and we'll try to shoot it in the early morning or the evening when the light isn't high, so we don't have that hot California sunshine to deal with. And we'll basically do everything we possibly can to sell this misdirect that we are actually in our neighborhood in Chicago.
Most of the show is shot in Los Angeles, actually. Don't tell anyone, because everyone that I meet on the street is convinced that we shoot it all in Chicago. We have exterior and interior pieces that you see cut together with some kind of precious coupons of the little bits that we do shoot in Chicago, and I feel proud because people don't know that we shoot it here in LA.
When we scout in LA, we always choose from a very limited palette of choices. It's just the nature of the city, So what we're generally looking for is a single element that the camera will see and that the audience will fix on. Sometimes it can be nothing more than a chain link fence, but it's some element that we can find here that will very succinctly bring the audience to some element that we've established in Chicago.
Over 3.5 years, we've become very familiar with the neighborhood and the qualities of the neighborhood, so we can find the match more easily and more authentically. But to a huge extent, we do rely on the ingenuity and inventiveness of Nina, and she, on zero budget, keeps coming up trumps for us.
This little neighborhood in Chicago where we shoot has sort of become home to us. This neighborhood is right on the backside of where the old stockyards were. It's a nice-looking neighborhood, but boy, it's fallen on hard times, and the people there are struggling.
The area has suffered as much as any, I think, in America by the decline in manufacturing industry. It's extremely high unemployment and everything that comes with that.
Interestingly, they've welcomed us with open arms, though. I don't sense any of that, these Hollywood types coming in. None of that. They just love it.
We pretty much invade their space for a couple weeks out of the year, and it would just be really no fun if they didn't actually appreciate us being there.
If we didn't have the exteriors to shoot, I don't think it would have the same kind of, I guess, reality to it, that real look. You can't imitate the streets of Chicago, especially in the South Side.
When we go to Chicago, because our time is so precious, we use those, they're almost like coupons for the bits of Chicago that we maximize, the views of Chicago, these rugged, decayed, large exterior spaces that you could never ever get here in LA. So those are the type of places that we embrace in Chicago.
I tend to take any excuse to get a camera right up close and shoot along a wall or a rusty fence, just because it's so beautifully emblematic of the disadvantages, the hurdles, the obstacles in their way.
They really like to get a train in every single shot. And I actually asked Mark Mylod, who's one of our directors and producers, you know, what's the deal?
When we started scouting for locations for the pilot, we came down this particular street where at one end was the commuter rail track. At the other end was the L, the elevated subway. They seemed to sandwich in. They acted like a sandwich on the street with people's lives going by at either end and our characters kind of stuck there. And I just like that. I just like that idea.
Constantly watching people going about their lives and going from one place to the other while, you know, Lip and Ian are always stuck. And I said, good answer, and I won't bother you anymore.
You know, we continue. I mean, every director that comes to shoot there is obsessed with the idea of getting a shot with the train in the background. It's become a big shameless cliche, but we're pretty shameless about that too.
Sheila Jackson's house is right around the corner from the Gallagher's house. So when we're shooting in Chicago, we walk from one set to the other set. So we really live in that neighborhood.
When you see the shot of the street and you see where Veronica's house is and you see where the Gallaghers live and you see the little park that's down the street, and to have it all be right there and not a set to go to, it even makes us feel like, yeah, we're in it. And you like that as an actor.
Going to the actual neighborhood and actually being in the same house that the Gallagher family would have lived in, or to actually feel like the Gallaghers and to feel how they would be and to see the type of normal activity that they see daily.
There's a vibe to any place you're in. There's a distinct character to it. There's an attitude. And I think it makes it so much more authentic every single time we go.
For me, working on Shameless is an honor. To work on a show that people feel is authentic and that I don't feel like my crew is pulling one over on them, that gives me great joy.
You want characters to have to face challenges and try to overcome them. That's what story is. And there's no shortage of obstacles in this world.
You know, Shameless has a unique philosophical take on that in that we don't dwell on the kitchen sink depression of it all. We hone in on what Paul Abbott actually celebrated in the original and what we see on the streets around the neighborhood that we shoot in every day, and that is actually the celebration of life and the actual fantastic energy and warmth of the people in their struggle, and they're all in it together. And the humanity of that is really gorgeous.